increased police presence around Drake's mansion in the Bridle Path neighborhood as the investigation continues into who shot his security guard.
And it's day 7 of a pro-Palestinian encampment at the University of Toronto. Organizers, they held a news conference today. We're going to tell you what they said coming up.
And Toronto's professional women's hockey league team will start its quest for its first championship today when the puck drops for the playoffs.
Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at noon. I'm Bakari Savage.
And I'm Lena Latafat. Thank you for joining us. The victim of yesterday's shooting on Winona Drive has now been identified.
31-year-old Trevor John was shot and killed outside an apartment near Oakwood and Vaughan Road around 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday. A woman was also hurt in the shooting, but is expected to recover. The suspects, they fled in a vehicle which police have not yet released a description of.
Well, police say they've increased their presence around the Bridle Path. This after the overnight shooting on the grounds of Drake's mansion yesterday.
Okay, let's go back to CP24's Courtney Hills, who continues our coverage live from in front of Drake's house. Courtney.
Hey, Bakari and Lena, and there is still a pretty significant security presence outside of Drake's mansion in the Bridle Path. We haven't seen any Toronto police, but they say they will be stepping up their presence in this neighborhood as they continue this investigation. Still a lot of questions here. We still don't know if Drake was home at the time of the shooting, and we have heard the security guard remains in hospital fighting to survive. This shooting happened at about 2 in the morning on Tuesday. According to police, the security guard was outside of Drake's mansion, standing outside of the gate when he was shot. The vehicle that took off, we don't have a description of that vehicle. Police say that's what they're looking for, but they haven't yet shared any information on who they think might be behind the shooting or a motive. The key in this is they say that what we're hearing that is from former detectives. Police will want to talk to that security guard. Obviously, they'll have to wait until he is recovering in hospital. But we talked to Mark Mendelson. He's a former Toronto homicide detective on that and the questions officers will have for that security guard.
The security guard is the eyewitness. Other than the video footage, he's the only witness. So I'm sure they are on, waiting on with bated breath to get into Sunnybrook. And when he's physically able to speak, they will interview him. They'll want to know, had that vehicle come by at other times during the course of the evening? Did he recognize the individual? Was there any conversation between the security guard and the people or person in the car? Did they shout something out? Was there a threat made? All of that information is very important to the police. So when he's able, I can guarantee you he's one of the first interviews they'll be doing.
And we also know police will be focusing on the motive here to try and figure out why someone would drive down this street and shoot at a security guard outside of Drake's mansion. Police really aren't speculating on any sort of motive here either. They confirmed they do have surveillance video. They have footage of what happened. They're not sharing those details just yet. They only say that there is a car involved. We have reached out to Toronto Police to see if there's any sort of update on this shooting investigation. At this time, we're being told no update. As for another person that police say they are in touch with, we asked yesterday, is Drake cooperating with this investigation? Officers confirmed that they are in touch and cooperating with Drake's team. Over to you.
All right, Courtney Hills reporting live. Thanks so much, Courtney. Well, more than 60 people have been charged following a joint investigation into child sexual exploitation led by the OPP.
CP24's Beatrice Vaisman has the details of what's called Project Aquatic, right, Beatrice?
Yeah, it's called Project Aquatic, Bakari and Lena. It was an investigation over the span of 10 days back in February from the 19th to the 29th. And this was what the police are calling a reactive investigation, essentially tipped off that this child's sexual exploitation was happening online. In the midst of this investigation, 64 people charged, facing more than 300 different charges. As when it comes to how many children, victims were identified, 34, and then 30 others were what's called safeguarded, essentially identified as vulnerable children and prevented, thanks to the quick actions of 27 different police services across the province, quick actions in protecting these 30 children from becoming victims of child exploitation online. Included amongst the people who have been arrested and charged as part of this investigation is a 26-year-old man. His name is Tyler Pennells, and Toronto Police Detective Sergeant Barb Adam confirming to CP24 that he was one of the people that was wrapped up in Project Aquatic. He was actually an educational assistant for the Toronto Catholic district school board. And so it becomes even more troublesome from investigators when people who are accused of child sexual exploitation are in positions of power when it comes to specifically working with children. So when it comes to Toronto Police's involvement in this blitz, here's what Detective Sergeant Barb Adam told CP24.
Toronto Police is always involved in any project. We're proud to be part of the provincial strategy. In this project, this specific project, we conducted, I have the numbers here, we conducted 18 search warrants. We arrested 13 parties, one of them being a repeat offender, and we laid 69 charges, seized 62 devices, and we identified and safeguarded 4 children.
So it really takes a lot of cooperation amongst different police services across the GTHA and broader province of Ontario to work together, collaborate, to share information, and ultimately to bring justice to these children. For example, my conversation just anecdotally with Detective Sergeant Barb Adam when it comes to all of the images and video that she and her team have to view through the investigations. She says they all do it because they know that on the other side there's a child who needs help. And so again, the collaboration amongst these police services is just spectacular. And artificial intelligence has made their jobs even more difficult in sifting through and distinguishing what's a real image of a child online and what's a fake or artificially made image. OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrick also talked about this investigation and the cooperation amongst police.
The success of this complex and multi-jurisdictional project is a direct result of the well-established partnerships and relentless commitment of our skilled investigators, analysts, and civilian staff. With more recent enhancements from the provincial government and through collaborative efforts, we have increased our capabilities to trace and intercept these offenses, demonstrating our steadfast commitment to disrupting the victimization of children online and to apprehend those intent on causing them harm.
The Canadian Centre for Child Protection reports some 3,000 complaints received each and every month. Nearly a third of those complaints, Bakari and Lena, are right here in the province of Ontario.
All right, Beatrice Spaceman keeping a close eye on the story. Thank you, Beatrice. A funeral visitation is underway for the baby killed in the wrong-way crash on Highway 401 last week. The child's grandparents were also killed in the collision on April 29th in Whitby. The story is so heartbreaking. The mother and father have asked for privacy, saying in a statement they are mourning the loss of 3 of the most precious people in their lives. The grandparents were visiting their 3-month-old grandchild when they were involved in a collision with a suspect vehicle that was being pursued by dozens of police officers. That police pursuit is now under investigation.
Encampment organizers, they voiced their concerns to members of the media earlier today. So the organizers say that the University of Toronto administration is failing to negotiate with them in good faith. The pro-Palestinian demonstrators, they want the school to divest from any companies that support the war in Gaza. Well, organizers are also accusing Toronto police of likely violating human rights by using night vision and facial recognition technology to surveil encampments.
Experts in digital and urban security on our campus have confirmed that Toronto Police Service are using audio and visual monitoring, night vision, to surveil the camp, to surveil their students, faculty, and staff on their own campus, likely including facial recognition technologies. Our legal and human rights scholars at the University of Toronto believe this form of policing likely contravenes human and labor rights and collective agreements for faculty, staff workers, and students, and also turns the university from a space of free exchange of ideas into a space of the criminalization of dissent that contravenes the purpose of the university.
Now, with over 100 universities across the world holding encampments, the Student Front for Liberation of Palestine has made it clear that we will no longer tolerate injustice. This is about the values we hold to ourselves: justice, equity, and liberation for us all. We can't just talk about these ideals, we have to live them, breathe them, and fight for them. So let us make this crystal clear. We will not move, we will not be pushed aside, and we will not rest until our demands are met, and the University of Toronto is held accountable.
First of all, I want to say that this has been an incredibly inspiring space of multiracial and multi-faith collaboration. It's also been a space where faculty have been here in large numbers, where campus labor has been here in support, where student unions are standing in solidarity. It is an incredible space where the students are modeling the very kinds of futures and relations that we so desperately need in this moment.
CP24 has reached out to Toronto Police for comment, but we haven't heard back just yet. Well, pro-Palestinian demonstrators, they marched into the University of Toronto's downtown campus last night. Demonstrators, they walked right past campus security, which had set up vehicles blocking the entrance to the school's grounds just north of College Street. And some people lit flares as they marched their way to King's College Circle. This is where a pro-Palestinian encampment has been set up since last week. Well, the campus protesters want the university to end ties with Israel and Israeli organizations. And Toronto Police tell CP24 that there were some officers in the area just to monitor the situation at the request of the university.
The encampment at the U of T has left Jewish students and faculty feeling unsafe on campus. Some say they've been attacked and refused entry, and many say they've experienced anti-Semitism. Hundreds are expected to attend a rally against hate this evening near the school. And a new poll suggests nearly half of Canadians are opposed to the pro-Palestinian encampments on university campuses. Just 31% of respondents in the Leger survey say they support the protests, while a third of people polled say the encampments should come down if protesters voice anti-Semitic views or hate speech. Support for the protests is strongest among respondents under the age of 35. And Vaughan Mayor Stephen Del Duca spoke this morning about a bylaw in the works that would prevent violent and hateful protests from being set up outside schools, hospitals, or places of worship.
I want to be very clear about this. My resolution does not seek to ban peaceful protests or demonstrations, including those that might occur as part of a labor union strike. These will continue to be permitted. My goal is to prevent those protests that clearly cross the line, protests that are no longer peaceful, protests that intimidate our residents, protests that are designed to incite hatred or violence, protests that, in my opinion, our charter was never designed to protect.
The proposed maximum fine for violating the bylaw would be $100,000.
And the Ministry of Health is pushing back against the Ontario Medical Association over issues surrounding the recruitment and retention of doctors. The argument from the province comes as the OMA has repeatedly warned that more than 2 million people do not have a family doctor, and thousands of physician jobs are going unfulfilled. Well, the province is in the midst of negotiations with the OMA for the next physician services agreement, which determines how doctors are compensated. And one of the doctors involved says that the talks are going so poorly that an arbitrator is now being asked to help determine compensation levels. And AstraZeneca is withdrawing its COVID-19 vaccine worldwide. The drug maker says that a surplus of updated vaccines that target the virus variants has led to a decline in demand for its shot. The vaccine's no longer being manufactured or supplied. Dozens of countries stopped using the AstraZeneca vaccine after rare blood clots were detected in a small number of people. The company is also seeking to have the vaccine's marketing authorizations pulled in Europe.
Well, Mayor Olivia Chow is beginning her mission to Los Angeles to promote Toronto as a film and TV hub. At least 40 delegates from across the industry are joining Chow at meetings with studios, entertainment, and technology companies looking to expand their operations in the city. In 2022, the screen production industry in Toronto set a record with $2.6 billion in direct spending and is one of the largest screen-based industries in North America, employing more than 35,000 people. To Queen's Park now, where NDP MPP Jill Andrew was asked to leave the legislature this morning for wearing a keffiyeh. The representative for Toronto St. Paul's was wearing the Middle Eastern scarf, as well as a talit, a Jewish prayer cloth she says was given to her by a Jewish constituent who objects to the keffiyeh ban in the chamber.
The Speaker's so-called compromise, which asks Ontarians to not only check their culture, their heritage at the door, but who thinks that a half-baked support of human rights and civil liberties is enough. It is not enough. It is not enough.
And the Speaker of the House recently amended the rules to allow the keffiyeh to be worn inside Queen's Park, but not inside the legislature. The NDP, of course, calling on the House Speaker to reverse his decision.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we will go live to Vancouver next to preview tonight's all-Canadian clash in the NHL playoffs.
Well, there will be an all-Canadian matchup in the NHL playoffs tonight when the Canucks and Oilers kick off for their second-round series. It's going to be interesting.
And for a preview, we're joined live by CTV Vancouver's Craig Krause. Craig, set it up for us.
Well, this is a day that many Canucks fans have been waiting for a few weeks now. Finally, in the city of Vancouver, there is going to be an outdoor watch party. The mayor actually made the announcement earlier this morning outside of City Hall. This has been a contentious issue over the last several weeks, as there's been communities across British Columbia that have had their outside watch parties during the first round of the NHL playoffs against the Nashville Predators, but the city of Vancouver did not. And a lot of that trauma from 2011 did seep into that decision. As we can all remember, there were riots that took place across the streets during that Stanley Cup run for the Vancouver Canucks. But finally, now that we're in round two, taking on the Edmonton Oilers, the mayor has made some compromises and made some decisions to open up some spaces and venues here in the city of Vancouver for those outdoor watch parties. I'm going to mention one right now. It's a large park called Oak Meadows Park, actually not too far away from where we're standing here at City Hall. They're saying that capacity will be around 2,000 people. There'll be a large screen there. They'll also have a large sound system as well for the fans to enjoy. Again, this will begin on Sunday. It won't be for the first game tonight here in Vancouver. It'll be on Sunday. Also, libraries and community centers here in the city of Vancouver will also be opening up. And I did speak to a spokesperson from the city of Vancouver this morning, and they're telling me that that will hold around 200 people each, so about 11 locations here around the city of Vancouver. And I have been speaking to councillors as well this morning, as well as the mayor, and they're telling me the reason why they didn't have this during the first round of the playoffs is because it required a lot of planning to take place, and they also wanted to disperse the crowds as well. During that 2011 run back in for the Stanley Cup in 2011 for the Vancouver Canucks, they had a lot of those parties taking place in the downtown core, and that led to some of the issues, according to the mayor. They wanted to disperse those outside of the downtown core. So right now we're here in the Cambie area. This park is in the Oak Street area, so it is outside of that major center of Vancouver. They're also saying if the Canucks can get past the Edmonton Oilers and Connor McDavid during the second round, they will open up the P&E. So it's like the C&E in Vancouver, or in Toronto rather, but the P&E will be opened up for fans to enjoy, so the capacity will be increased during that run. But again, that will happen in the third round, not in the second round. But many fans are just having a sigh of relief this morning as they've been eagerly awaiting this announcement. And finally, the mayor has come forward with some plans.
Okay, that's good to know, Craig. It's always interesting when you've got two Canadian teams going head-to-head in the playoffs like this. I'm sure you've spoken with a number of Canucks fans, but I want to talk about the Edmonton Oilers. Talk about their chances and how those fans are feeling.
Oh, absolutely. So when you have Alberta, hockey history runs deep in that province. Obviously, you have the Calgary Flames, but the Edmonton Oilers as well. And history there is also so deep. And they're looking to push forward with this core unit of Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. Finally getting to that Western Conference final would be huge for Edmonton Oilers fans, and potentially a run at the Stanley Cup as well. So it's going to be a test for both teams. Edmonton is the front runner in this series against the Vancouver Canucks, even though the Canucks beat them 4 times during the regular season. But as we all know, with the Vancouver Canucks, they've been dealing with some goaltending issues and injuries during the first round and a half of this playoffs. And they're starting a young Latvian goalie named Shilovs. He was spending most of his time in the minor leagues. He's now making his debut. He's been playing quite well in the playoffs so far. So it's really a test to see if the Canucks can hold up and be healthy during the second round, as we know they have quite the firepower when it comes to offense. But again, when you're talking about firepower with offense, you have Connor McDavid, probably the most premier talent in the entire world when it comes to putting that puck in the back of the net. So it's going to be interesting to see how this series turns out, and I wouldn't be surprised if it goes 7 games.
All right, CTV Vancouver's Craig Krause. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Well, coming up next on CP24, we're going to walk you more through the news of the day, including we're going to have more on the PWHL playoffs as they begin. Stay with us.
The Future Is Now Awards. They were handed out at the Western Harbor Castle last night.
The awards honored 10 kids from across the country for their efforts to make Canada a better place. They received individual awards for their work to address things like bullying, climate change, and mental health. We spoke to some of the winners on CP24 Breakfast.
I just wanted that to make living with type 1 diabetes easier, and I want to make our way to a cure. But along that path, I want it to be easier for everyone to live with it. And a big thing we work on is access for all, which is meaning that no matter what kind of funds you have access to the best technology to make living with it easier.
Yes. I was recognized for equitable education and opportunities. I am a newcomer to Canada. I immigrated 4 years ago from Nigeria, and since then I've just found a calling almost to work towards equitable education in the community, giving my experiences.
The winners receive financial awards to support their causes, as well as year-round coaching and mentorship.
Well, Americans are flocking to Europe, not for its culture, history, and food, but to see Taylor Swift.
Swift is scheduled to kick off an 18-city European leg of her record-setting Eras Tour. That'll take her to storied cities like Paris and Stockholm. And Americans, well, they are gobbling up tickets that are often cheaper than when she toured in America. And that's in part because Europe has stricter rules on ticket resales. Travel experts are calling it tour tourism. That's interesting. The Paris Stadium estimates that 20% of tickets for tomorrow's show were bought by Americans. The Europeans aren't going to like that.
Well, Toronto FC plays its second match of the Canadian Championship tonight. TFC will take on CS Saint Laurent, a semi-professional club based in Quebec. And the second leg will be played in 2 weeks at BMO Field. Kickoff tonight is at 7.
Toronto's professional women's hockey team starts their quest for the first ever championship today. Toronto takes on Minnesota tonight at Coca-Cola Coliseum. The matchup was set earlier this week when Toronto, who finished first in the regular season, elected to play Minnesota, who finished fourth.
And the team practiced at the Waterfront Arena this morning ahead of their first ever playoff game. They'll face Minnesota tonight in Game 1 of the best-of-5 series. The winner will then face the winner of the Montreal-Boston semifinal for the Walter Cup. Puck drop is set for 7 o'clock.
We tried to take a lighthearted approach to it. We dove deep into the details that we thought were important, but I think it's special. It's unique. I mean, when I first heard the league was going to do it, we were excited about it. We thought it was great from a fan's perspective and an interest perspective. And at that point, not knowing we were going to be that team to have to select it, but. I think it gives some extra motivation to the opposition, but it's still a nice little advantage for finishing first to get to pick your opponent.
It's special to be part of it. I think that this whole year has just been such an incredible experience, from the first game of the season to us being able to play in the Scotiabank game to the Montreal game. There's been a lot of historic moments and record-breaking moments that we've been able to be a part of, but it definitely is very special to be part of this in the first inaugural season, and we're just going to cherish every moment.
Toronto beat Minnesota in 3 of 4 meetings during the regular season.
Well, coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, an increased police presence around Drake's home in the Bridle Path neighborhood as the investigation continues into who shot a security guard. An increased police presence around Drake's home in the Bridle Path neighborhood as the investigation continues into who shot his security guard.
It is day 7 of a pro-Palestinian encampment at the University of Toronto. Organizers held a news conference today. We'll tell you what they said coming up.
And Toronto's professional women's hockey league team will start its quest for its first championship today when the puck drops on the PWHL playoffs.
Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at noon. I'm Lena Ladifat.
And I'm Bakari Savage. More than 60 people have been charged following a joint investigation into child sexual exploitation. This was led by the OPP.
CP24's Beatrice Faisman has the latest on this massive investigation. Beatrice.
Lena, you're right. It is a massive investigation. It spans right across the province, every corner of it, in fact, according to police officials that we heard from this morning. And it involves 27 different police services across the province, including Toronto Police. In total, 64 people are facing charges, more than 300 charges, in fact. 34 children were identified as victims of Project Aquatic. This is an online child exploitation investigation. And 30 others were safeguarded by police. So essentially, officers got to these 30 kids in time before these vulnerable children became victims of child sexual exploitation online. As investigators made clear, predators go where children go, and that includes the internet. Here's what we heard from Detective Staff Sergeant Tim Brown from the OPP.
We need a continuous and holistic approach to this societal problem. Parents, educators, children, internet providers, and entire communities must be informed and vigilant about the realities of child luring, child grooming, and the dangers posed online. Education, awareness, and strong enforcement action are the foundations for combating child sexual exploitation on the internet.
We've learned that this person, 26-year-old Tyler Pennells from Toronto, was charged by Toronto Police as part of Project Aquatic. He was, as we confirmed with Detective Sergeant Barb Adam with Toronto Police's Internet Child Exploitation Unit, he was an educational assistant at the Toronto Catholic District School Board. When we reached out to the school board at the time of his arrest and charging, they told us that he was on leave from the TCDSB at the time. And so Toronto Police, along with every police service across Ontario, eager to identify, to find, to arrest, and to charge people they suspect are taking advantage of children online. When it comes to just how many children are being impacted, we heard from a spokesperson from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection who talked about some of these staggering stats that she is seeing, but also what needs to be done to better protect youth.
Since its inception, Project Arachnid has issued over 40 million removal requests to 1,500 service providers in 100 countries. Every single day, Arachnid issues upwards of 20,000 removal notice requests to hosting providers around the world. We know that the expeditious removal of child sexual abuse material is critical for survivors' healing and to minimize ongoing re-victimization.
And so we know how big of a problem this has come. This Center for Child Protection saying some 3,000 complaints are issued every single month, about a third of them issued right here in the province of Ontario. And so that's why these officers are so passionate, so dedicated to protecting kids who are, of course, at their most vulnerable. And we know that when it comes to the offenders, they range in age, Courtney and Bakari, from 16 right up until the late 80s. Detective Staff Sergeant Tim Brown telling CP24 absolutely people are now grooming teenagers and youth to become offenders as well. And so that's why police are so dedicated in protecting these kids, and they want parents and educators to be aware as well, guardians to be aware of what the kids are doing online. Back to you.
All right, Beatrice Faisman reporting live. Thank you, Beatrice. Well, the victim of yesterday's shooting on Winona Drive has now been identified.
31-year-old Trevor John was shot and killed outside an apartment near Oakwood and Vaughan Road. This was around 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday. A woman was also hurt in the shooting, but is expected to recover. The suspects fled in a vehicle which police have not yet released a description of.
Well, police say they've increased their presence around the bridle path. This after the overnight shooting on the grounds of Drake's mansion yesterday.
And CP24's Courtney Hills is live and continues our coverage since this broke yesterday morning. Courtney.
Good afternoon, Lena Bakari. I will say it's been pretty quiet here in this Bridle Path neighborhood. There's security outside of Drake's mansion. That's really nothing new. We always have security out here. And we learned yesterday it was a security guard who was shot overnight on Tuesday, very, very early in the morning. This afternoon, this is still an active investigation. Police say they have no updates on this case. We're waiting to see if they might share some video from the surveillance footage they have. They say they have video of what happened. Obviously, there's a lot of questions over what that video looks like, what they think happened, maybe even the motive here. They're not saying, at least not yet, but this certainly has this neighborhood talking. I've talked to a couple of neighbors, many of them saying, they really feel for the security guard in this case. Also saying, they don't feel comfortable going on camera, but their thoughts are with this person who suffered a serious gunshot wound, was rushed to hospital, remains in hospital right now in critical condition. So at last check and what we've heard from police, this person is fighting to survive. We talked to a former Toronto detective, Mark Mendelson, about this investigation and what the officers will be doing now, especially when it comes to security video.
I think what they're doing at this time, because they've already stated publicly that they do have the incident captured on video. But if you know that area of the Bridle Path, there are huge homes. Each one of them have very elaborate security systems, including 10 or 15 cameras. So they're going to try and capture every piece of footage they can to not only identify the vehicle and the license plate, the make and model, and possibly the suspect or suspects that were in it, but they also want to follow that vehicle in terms of the direction of travel. Where did it come from, and where did it go after the shooting? That, from an investigative point of view, that's important. So that takes a little bit of time.
And police had said in terms of the video, they were focused on the quality of that video. So once they maybe get a better sense of who they say they're looking for, maybe a better image of the vehicle, they could release that. And that would be something that the public would be interested in, because there is a lot of interest in this case. We don't know what the motive was, why someone drove down this street in the Bridle Path neighborhood and shot at a security guard. Obviously, that was a question to police. They say they're not speculating at this time. They also wouldn't even say if Drake is home, and we still don't know if he's even home at this time. We say there's security outside. That's often the case, given who he is and the value of his home in this neighborhood. So this is certainly a story a lot of people are talking about at this time. And we can tell you, Lena Bakari, police say that Drake's team is cooperating with investigators. Over to you.
Okay, CP24's Courtney Hill's continuing our coverage. Thanks a lot. Well, a funeral visitation's underway for the baby killed in the wrong-way crash on Highway 401 last week. So the child's grandparents were also killed in the collision April 29th in Whitby. The mother and father, they've asked for privacy, saying in a statement that they're mourning the loss of three of the most precious people in their lives. The grandparents were visiting their 3-month-old grandchild when they were involved in a collision with a suspect vehicle that was being pursued by dozens of police officers. That police pursuit is now under investigation.
Encampment organizers voiced their concerns to members of the media today. The organizers say the University of Toronto administration is failing to negotiate with them in good faith. The pro-Palestinian demonstrators want the school to divest from any companies that support the war in Gaza. They are also concerned with police behavior. Organizers are also accusing Toronto police of likely violating human rights by using night vision and facial recognition technology to surveil the encampments.
Surveillance brings enormous risks of racial injustice and violations of all students' rights, possibly endangering their safety both in the short and medium term. Universities have a responsibility not to inflict the known harms of policing, particularly surveillance technologies known for racial biases and human rights abuses, onto their diverse student body. Leading scholars, including many based at the University of Toronto, have shown how surveillance and surveillance technologies negatively impact marginalized communities in particular.
When U of T admins say that our university is U of T private property, they aren't wrong, but we as the members, as students, community members in this community are a part of that we. They are weaponizing the idea of private property in order to deny students of their charters of their charter rights of freedom of expression and also their rights under the university's own statement of institutional purpose. They are basically contradicting the founding documents of the university.
We have had absolutely beautiful relations on this site. No concerns, no incidents, no violence. And yet, there is tremendous security and surveillance pointing inwards on the site. Any incidents that have happened that have caused any concern have been outside and as the result of counter-protests and yet that surveillance and security points within. We have a question about that for our administration.
CP24 reached out to Toronto Police for comment, but has not heard back yet.
NDP MPP Jill Andrew was asked to leave the legislature this morning for wearing a keffiyeh. The representative for Toronto St. Paul's was wearing the Middle Eastern scarf as well as a talit. This is a Jewish prayer cloth. She says that it was given to her by a Jewish constituent who objects to wearing, or rather the keffiyeh ban in the chamber.
I am standing here as a member of Provincial Parliament for my constituents who are on the right side of history. And that is constituents who are calling for peace, who are calling for an end to violence, and who are calling for us as elected officials to do as Rabbi Heschel, Abraham Joshua Heschel, did in that house, and pray with our feet.
The Speaker of the House recently amended the rules to allow the keffiyeh to be worn inside Queen's Park, but not inside the legislature.
It is 12:41, 20 degrees. Let's get a check on traffic. Something's over to Adjoa with a look at that.
Well, good afternoon, Lena. Yeah, we are dealing with quite a few problems for the afternoon drive. Issues. It's a collision happening on the southbound lanes of the 400. It's on the ramp that takes you to the 401 if you're traveling on the eastbound ramp. It is the right lane belonging to this collision involving a transport and another vehicle, so just expect a little bit of a slowdown as you head through the area. Also, problems just moved over to the side. It's the eastbound 401 ramp that takes you to Eglinton. It looks like this collision now off to the shoulder is blocking the right lane of that exit ramp. Also, watch problems clear on the southbound Don Valley Parkway south of Lawrence. Multi-vehicle collision was in the two right lanes, also out of the way, and we are still dealing with problems on the QEW Niagara bound. It's right at the start of the ramp to Bronte. Find the left lane of that ramp blocked at the collision. Also a bit of a slowdown from well before Trafalgar. I'll send it back to you.
The CP24 traffic report is brought to you by CapitalDirect.ca.
Coming up next on CP24 Live at noon. Participation has released its latest report on kids, their physical activity levels, and there's room for improvement. Participation's latest report card is giving Canadian kids a passing grade for physical activity levels, but only just.
And for a closer look at this and what we mean by that, we're joined live now by Lee Vanderloo, Scientific Director for Participation. Lee, thanks so much for joining us. So kids in this country got a D+ from you when it comes to physical activity. That's not a great grade. What happened and why?
Yeah, so, it is a consistent grade that we've been seeing over the last few years, and these numbers were persistent even before the pandemic. We saw them drop throughout the pandemic and some slight rebounds as, some of our activities have started to revert back to normal. But one of the things that we're noticing that is really consistently being observed as an important trend is just this idea that physical activity is really being socially engineered out of the day-to-day lives of children and youth. They're being expected to spend a lot more time focused on other various tasks, and those inherently just typically require more sitting or being sedentary and a lot more time in front of screens. And that's whether it's for social reasons or even for completing homework, academic reasons. And so it's not necessarily surprising why we're seeing those trends, but it's definitely something we need to be cognizant of and to figure out that now is the time to intervene and what is that going to look like and who should be involved.
Yeah, along those lines, Lee, the report argues that the pandemic and lockdowns impacted children's physical activity. But, you also mentioned pre-pandemic levels as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, over the last few decades, we have seen this downward trend in children's physical activity levels and being less and less active. Again, just, the activities that children participate in today don't inherently require as much movement as they would have done historically in the past. Fewer children are utilizing active transportation to get to and from school or to a friend's house. And just the explosion in screen use. It's so omnipresent in our day-to-day lives. And one of the main foci of this year's report card was really also how do we superimpose this trend with low activity levels with a changing climate. So we're seeing an increase in temperatures, adverse weather alerts, increase in rainfalls, a number of forest fires, so the smoke, air pollution. And so what does this mean in terms of, rallying for resistance, really helping to future-proof our kids to ensure that they're able to stay active in light and despite of changing weather-related and climate-related issues?
Yeah, I remember being in school, and a D+ is not what you wanted. So how do we make sure kids in this country get an A? What are your takeaways? What's your advice?
Yeah, well, the great thing is there's a lot of different things that we can be starting to do right now. And I think the first is the recognition of, it really does take a village to raise the healthiest and happiest children. So it's not just about assigning blame to parents and caregivers or even to the school system, but realizing that we need to be thinking about all the various settings that children are spending their waking hours in, and how do we ensure that opportunities to get active are being provided? Are parents talking to their kids about physical activity and the importance of a strong climate and the importance of spending time outdoors, and how that's not only going to help them feel happier, be healthier, but it's also going to help address issues related to eco-anxiety, for example. Within the school system, ensuring that one outdoor playtime or recess is not an option because of, say, excessive rain or heat advisories, that additional opportunities are still provided to children and youth indoors. So it's not about just forgetting about them altogether, but ensuring that there's opportunities. And then if we look even more broadly than that, if we look to the community setting, policy, program, infrastructure, or the government, it's really ensuring that additional funds are put into place, that city bylaws are also supportive of active transportation, supporting kids to get active, that there's sufficient funding, especially to support children and youth from more equity denied groups, to ensure that we're providing not only more equal but equitable opportunities to all children and youth in Canada, and to really get back to making physical activity fun.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Lee Vanderloo, Scientific Director for Participation, getting that D+ up to an A. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Next on CP24 Live at noon, PWHL Toronto starts its playoff run tonight against Minnesota. We'll preview the series next.
Toronto's professional women's hockey team starts their quest for their first ever championship today.
And for more on this, we're joined live by Ellen Hislop, co-founder of The Gist. Ellen, good to be with you. Thank you for joining us. Women's hockey really in the spotlight here. Set this up for us. All eyes on Toronto and Minnesota.
Yes, it's the first ever PWHL playoffs, which is just so exciting. It's been a long time coming to get here. Toronto is facing off against Minnesota, and in a unique twist, Toronto actually selected Minnesota to play in the first round. They had the choice between the number 3 seed and the number 4 seed, with number 3 being Boston and number 4 being Minnesota. Minnesota had a pretty poor end to their season, and I think that's really what influenced Toronto selecting Minnesota as opposed to Boston.
Okay, so Ellen, give us a preview, your thoughts on Montreal versus Boston, because we're going to play the winner, right? And, I'm actually putting this out there. Toronto's going to play the winner.
Yeah.
I do think that it's very likely that Toronto is going to defeat Minnesota. They have people like Natalie Spooner and Sarah Nurse on their team. Natalie Spooner scored more power play goals than the entirety of the Minnesota team this year. So I do think that there's some disparity in these teams. When we look at Boston and Montreal, Boston has really turned on the heat at the end of the season. They are peaking at the right time. Aaron Frankel, their goaltender, is outstanding. Hilary Knight has really stepped up. At the same time, you have Montreal, who is captained by Marie-Philippe Poulin, who, of course, always comes in clutch. The big thing with Montreal is that they haven't had great success in overtime. And as we know, in the postseason, overtime is very important. There are going to be 15-minute periods that is going to be golden goal. So that could be the differential there. But again, whoever wins that series is going to be playing the winner of Toronto versus Minnesota in the finals.
I have about a minute left here, Ellen, but can we just talk about how good this year has been for women's sports? I mean, so much interest in the WNBA. Talk about the buzz around around the first ever PWHL playoffs, if you can, and the level of interest here.
2024 has just been so awesome thus far for women's sports. Really, records are being broken day in and day out, whether it's IRL attendance, whether it's viewership on TV. I think the biggest thing with the PWHL is that they have managed to sell out not only a number of regular season games, but also special games where they have played games in NHL arenas in Montreal, in Toronto, in Pittsburgh, in New York, and the list goes on and on. And for a season that has really only 5 months, it really sets themselves up well for when the second season starts upcoming in November.
Okay, Ellen Heslop, co-founder of The Gist. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching CP24 Live at Noon. Thanks for being with us.